Hello, welcome to another video, and this is a follow-up to my previous video about where we gave you an overview of the critical changes to make when things go wrong in your rehab program. I'm going to break it into three parts, this being the first part where we'll talk about specifically back pain. Now there's a lot of exercises that I have not included, because if I was to include them all this would take about 3 hours or 4 hours, but really the purpose of this video is to provide you with the concept of the overview of it, and especially the one thing that I brought up a lot in the previous video, which was to go from vertical loading, like in the example of this exercise being the Romanian Deadlift, or just bending really, like in the real world we just call it bending over, but in the gym we call it a deadlift. So often with a back pain person, this is the pain trigger, this is very much the movement that is likely to cause the pain. So it's often what they were doing at the time when their back went, usually around about that point there, and that's if they're bending poorly. Often we don't see them bending like this, as Dylan's showing. They're usually bending very poorly, and the spine gets exposed to incredible damage, especially the discs. We also see other versions of hip pain where there's glute weakness and things like that, thoracic stiffness, all those sort of things that I've spoken about in many other videos many times. But this is the one exercise that we're often trying to get to people to do, because if they become good at executing it correctly and become stronger at it, their chances of further hurting themselves are very greatly diminished, if almost not near to zero. All right, but there's obviously great risk in doing so, because you could aggravate things in that process of learning it or becoming stronger at it. So there's always a chance something could go wrong and you have to go backwards. So what do you do when you go backwards? So that's the point of this video. So this is what we call vertical loading. All right, so there's a lot of compression. If I just go back, so when we're just standing, there's just a lot of pressure from gravity really putting into all of the joints, not just the spine, everything. So if I wanted to get rid of the vertical loading, I just need to go to horizontal loading, because when I go horizontally to the ground, that's when I'm going to greatly diminish any of the compressive forces on my back. So my first go-to choice with most types of back pain is the horse stance or bird dog or quadruped, whatever you want to call it. It's such a simple exercise, but so effective at doing so many things, and I've been through this exercise so many times, but just for those of you who maybe haven't caught it in my previous videos, obviously it's mainly known as an exercise for the core, and it really is. So it really, because you've got an opposite arm and leg stabilizing movement, you become quite unstable. So the core has to try and keep everything still, otherwise you'd fall over all the time. But it's actually quite a unique hip stability exercise for this hip. It's a good glute strengthening exercise for this leg. It's even a shoulder stabilizing exercise for the shoulder that's on the ground. So it encompasses a lot of things, but the main thing is, with regards to back pain, is that it doesn't compress the spine. It actually allows you to lengthen the spine. So I get to work on glute strengthening on a small scale, core strengthening on a small scale, hip mobilizing probably on a great scale, and shoulder stability. So really a lot of the things that are a real problem with the back pain person I cover in one exercise. But it's a great one when things go wrong, because the worst thing you can do is nothing. If you do nothing, everything will stiffen up and get much worse. So you have to keep moving, but you don't want to use movements that are going to aggravate things, because otherwise you're not going to get better either. So finding choices of exercises like this one as your go-to things when you're playing with fire, when you're doing deadlifts and bending exercises, but like we said at the beginning, you actually have to, because otherwise you're never going to change anything. All right, so that'd be one of my exercises I like to use. This next one probably more useful for extension-related back pain problems, like sacroiliac problems, where people really have pain in extension. This is a regression that they can learn to control the extension, but without the compression on the spine in a standing position. All right, so if they make a mistake at this point here, it's not a disastrous consequence, and they can quickly get out of it as well, and really monitor the level of the intensity that they want to create from it. All right, so this is a great way, and again, it's actually known as a core strengthening exercise for the abdominals, and it definitely is, but it's really the timing and sequencing of the hips. You can see how Dylan sort of stuck back with his hips here. We would have loved to have seen him extend a bit more. So, but that's a classic thing you would see with an extension-related problem, and even stiffness in the lats, which might be thoracic problems. I've left stretches out of this particular video just to come back on the go-to exercises of stabilizing and strengthening, but you certainly would want to have some mobility things. And to be honest, if all these were even too difficult as well, my next step backward would be just mobilizing and mobility things like foam rolling and stretches and stuff like that, especially for the hips and thoracic regions when I'm talking about back pain. All right, so my first two regressions are the horse stance and the forward ball roll. My next one would be the side plank from a kneeling position. And again, I've been over this one many times before, but this one's quite unique in that it does have some element of glute activation in it, which again is always usually a problem with back pain. It's again known as a core, as an abdominal, for the obliques, an abdominal strengthening exercise, and it certainly is, but it's way more than that, because this position, when they start back, you can see a bit hard to see on this angle, but Dylan's sort of on an angle like this. So for when he comes forward, he actually has to push when he comes up off the ground, he has to push his hips forward. That pushing of his hips forward is where he activates his glutes. So when he activates his glutes, that bit there, and then he holds it, he's got this sort of not a very tough exercise for the glutes, but they're definitely being activated. But they're being activated in combination with the obliques, especially on this side, the obliques here, and even the QL around the back, and their lower abdominals especially. So they're playing a big role in keeping the pelvis from collapsing to the floor. All right, so this is a really good one especially for lateral pelvic tilt problems. Where we see a lot of hip-based problems. This one's quite a good exercise, and for all cases of either flexion or extension back pain, this is quite a good one because you're not flexing or extending. And again, like all the exercises so far, we're horizontal, so the spine can lengthen. There's no vertical compression of the spine or even the hip itself. So quite a good way to continue your strengthening with very little risk of aggravation or problems coming from it. All right, so there's some of my go-to exercises to keep people moving. So they're still moving forward with their progress. They're just not doing the standing things that come with the greater risk. The last one would be a kneeling deadlift. So they can still practice bending. They're just not going to be doing it standing up. So it's amazing how different it is just being in a kneeling position. Again, with sciatic pain and stuff like that, where there's really hard to bend forward, there's just so much stiffness through the back of the legs, through the hamstrings, they can't do it. But it's amazing that they can do it when they're kneeling. All right, so this is another go-to one that I get a lot of people to continue working on, so that when the time is right and the pain's settling and things like that, we can slowly start to progress to standing things again. I most likely wouldn't go straight back to lifting load with the deadlift. I would do a lot of other things between that. But these would be, any time that something goes wrong, these would be my go-to things. Some people might prefer the side plank. Some might prefer the bird or the horse stance one, and others it could be this kneeling deadlift. It doesn't really matter. You just sort of, when you work with people, you get to see the different types of pain and how they respond, what might be the better choice for them. So again, there's other ones that you could include, but this is just to give you the idea, the concept of like getting out of vertical loading into horizontal loading, and then depending on what you need to control, whether it's lateral tilt or extension or flexion. And I sort of gave you an exercise for each one of those then, which way you may go with things. And that way you can help the body to realign, and on a very small scale, so it's not enough to make long-lasting results, but it does allow you to provide a good foundation and stepping stone to the things that will. All right, so I hope that video explains that in a bit better detail for you. On the next one, we'll go over, which will be like knee pain, and then we'll discuss shoulder pain. All right, we'll see you on the next videos.